Hello again, this is Matt with Endor Labs, and we're going to continue this series of Endor Labs' policies. In the first video, we talked about finding policies, meaning we want to be able to find the things that matter to us most. We then talked about how those finding policies will trigger an action policy, where we're going to get really surgical about when to break a build, when to create a ticket, when to comment on a pull request or open a pull request, and bring it right to the developers and not overwhelm them with all of these alerts and really just bring their attention to the ones that matter most. And in this video, we're going to talk about exception policies. So exception policies are, hey, this is a legitimate finding, but in our case and in our circumstances, it doesn't really apply to us. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an exception for it in order to continue working, right? And this can happen for 100 different reasons. Okay. It's really, again, everybody's environment is so different and not every finding applies to everyone. So what we want to do is give that flexibility to say, okay, I understand why you alerted me to this Endor, but I want the flexibility and capability to make an exception for it. And there's a couple different ways to do this. And like all the other policies, you can create an exception policy, action finding, what remediation, whichever type you're working on. You can define that at your org level namespace and have that apply to every single namespace. Or you could say, hey, only in these namespaces with these teams do I want these exception policies to apply, or action policies, finding policies, remediation policies, whatever have you. And that's one way to kind of manage these policies at a per org, per team, per project level. Or um, you can also apply exception policies on a per finding level as well. So let's look at how to actually apply this at perhaps a per org level, and then we can look at a per finding level as well, and kind of the situations there where you may want to do this. So if I create a exception policy, and again, just like everything else, you could do it from scratch using Rego, or we'll give you some templates here. So common ones is very common for like dependencies, right? Specific vulnerability ID, specific finding name, the dependency name, maybe it's in a certain package. So in one package, a finding could definitely affect it, and another one it couldn't. Maybe you want to exclude certain findings from a certain package or from a certain dependency because you have, I don't know, later down the line, some certain WAF rules that may not apply, right? You still have the vulnerability in there, but under these circumstances that I know will likely not change, whatever have you, this is an exception for us. Okay. Custom ones, again, you can get very, very, very surgical with this to say this specific vulnerability with this finding name in this dependency that would perhaps be inside this package, because you can have a dependency in two completely different packages that do two completely separate things that you may want to have an exception for in one instance, but not in another. Can I fix it? Kind of see the theme here, right? A category, maybe it's a vulnerability. Maybe you want to do an AI model, right? Hey, we vetted this AI model. We know it's good to use. Maybe the certain tooling, whatever have you here. Again, you can do the criticality or severity. You could do certain types as well. Unused dependency, maybe you want to look at typo squatted stuff, unmaintained, license risk, custom, whatever have you there. The relationship, again, direct or transitive. Sometimes vulnerabilities are, under certain circumstances in a transitive way may not be exploitable, but in a direct way, they are. Maybe something like that, right? You could do function level reachability, certain ecosystem, a custom tag. Hey, any finding with this tag, I want you to automatically create an exception for. Certain file paths. So this is a very, very common one. Test file paths, right? So for SaaS, this is really big, not as much for SCA because we can actually determine whether or not a dependency is a test dependency, is it scoped that way. So for SaaS, this comes in super handy because what we're doing is saying, hey, any files in this test file path, I want you to make an exception for. They're test files, right? So you can certainly do that. You can scope the dependency, again, approximate dependency, all of that good stuff. Those are custom. And then static analysis specifically, we kind of want to simplify it down a little bit to say, hey, if it's this rule name with this tag, Maybe you do a custom tag as well. And again, the file path comes in really handy there. And then you want to give also some reason. Why are we making an exception for this? So in triage, we're working on it. Perhaps it's a false positive. We've accepted the risk. It's been resolved in another way. Perhaps again, later down the line in your SDLC, you've resolved it in a different kind of way or other, whatever reason, right? And then you can go ahead and actually choose an expiration to say, you know what, I want to make an exception for this now, but I want every 30 days, I want to keep an eye on it, every quarter, whatever have you, right? Or just never expire, right? Again, every vulnerability is different, every environment is different, every language is different, there's so many variables that go into this kind of stuff. We want to give you that flexibility to cater to you and your workflow rather than the other way around and give you the flexibility. I want to include this in certain projects. Get the idea. It's very similar. We want to make it very consistent throughout, no matter what policy you're working on, to apply the same, same kind of methodology, if you will. We'll name it, we'll give it a tag. And when you do that, we have a few here, right? Like this example, this is a custom exception policy for this specific finding in this specific package. We've accepted that risk. Okay. And then you can assign the scope. Maybe it's for a container scan specifically. And this is the other thing about our policies is that no matter kind of what tool you're scanning with or you're using, container scan, CI/CD, SCA, SAS, the policies will apply to all the projects you designated to be applied for, right? Same thing with here. Hey, it's not available, but it's still, there's another reason why we're making an exception for this, right? Fix not available. It's a very simple one. So what does this look like in practice? What is some kind of a good real world example? We have a customer where they have a lot of these findings for their SAST scanning, right? In a couple projects for Python. And they've agreed, hey, this is actually a good rule. I'm glad you alerted us to it, but we have some mechanisms that we provide later down the line that this doesn't actually apply to us. So yes, it is a legit rule. It's a legit finding, but we do want to make an exception for this. And that's super easy to do. So now we're going to make exceptions at the per project level, one instance or another, and you can go ahead and actually do this in code with the developer by marking exceptions. We're working on something that we call contested, where there will be a whole approval process for these exceptions between security and development. But what you can do is say, okay, for this finding here, let's just pick one. I want to go ahead and add an exception for it. And because each finding has its own unique ID, this exception will only apply to this specific finding in this project. So you can kind of think of it as like a one-off, right? And we're going to include the finding name for you automatically. We'll include all this other information. Again, this is up to you if you want to go ahead and tweak these a little bit, but this is the main thing we're working on here is this specific finding, right, with its ID. Then you can just give a reason. Hey, we've accepted this risk. We can say exclusions, inclusions, description. This is where you can put like your notes, right? To say, we've enabled certain precautions to prevent this vulnerability from being exploited, right? So this is like kind of your notes section that you can do. You can give it a tag, and then now I can create that policy, right? And what's nice is when we go into projects, let's say it's a brand new project here, we'll hide the exceptions for you automatically because a lot of times you don't need to see the exceptions, right? You've accepted them for a reason. So by default, we'll hide them from you. When you want to see them, just uncheck the box. When you want to see certain ones, check which certain ones you want to see. When you want to see, okay, which findings have an exception because they're in triage or they're a false positive or they're resolved, right? We can actually go ahead and see those and get a bird's eye view of what findings are being accepted. And then of course we can see, okay, when do the exceptions that expire or which findings have exceptions that expire within the next day, week, 4 weeks, month, week, whatever have you, right? So very, very flexible with our exception policies. A lot that you can do. And again, this is all configurable at the org level. at the project level, at the namespace level. It's really just going to depend on your environment and your workflow, but you have the option to do this. You have the flexibility to cater to your workflow rather than us, having you cater to our workflow and what we think is right. It's what you think is right and what works for you more than anything. Okay, so we've covered finding policies, we've covered action policies, we've covered exception policies. The next type of policy and the last type of policy we'll talk about in this series is actually my favorite one. These are remediation policies. And when you want to talk about developer friendliness, I don't think it gets any more developer friendly than remediation policies. And we'll talk about that in the next video. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next one.